Hello everyone, welcome to the Everything Dodgeball podcast. I have Ben McAdam today from the Swedish Spectaculars, and I'm really looking forward to this one. We've been talking about dodgeball for a long while now. We've been knowing each other for a lot of years, and always in between seasons and especially at tournaments, we like to bounce off ideas of each other's heads. So I think we've always been really into the topic and talked our team tactics and basically how we see the game. We always tend to lean towards the same conservative style of play and our struggles with players who see the game more creative than us. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see also the differences in our countries, our national teams, our programs, and how we see the game and how we think dodgeball should progress from here on, and what we think we can do and what we think about certain hot topics that basically are important to all dodgeball countries at this point. That's something I've been learning throughout this podcast, that basically it doesn't matter how good you are as a nation, you just struggle with a lot of similar problems in your programs and your sport basically. So, and we want to help build that, and maybe this conversation can get us a step closer to that. So without any further ado, I present to you Ben McAdam. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Stefan. I've been longing for this chat as well. Get it on record. Let's dive in.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna just start with a short summary of who you are, what's your playing career and background is, and then we're gonna jump right into the World Cup and go on from there, I'd say.
Yeah, so I started in 2008 in my first year of university. It was a freshers' fair. I joined more for the social side. It was a mixed sport. Back then it was run by 3 former rugby players, so there was a big emphasis on the more social drinking side. But then it ended up being that, and we were going to every single tournament that first year just hungover. It was always on a Saturday or Sunday. We'd been out the night before. But it ended up being that we were actually pretty good at this game. At the end of the first year, we came third in the national champs. And then the next 3 years, we won the national championship every year and pretty much every major tournament. We had an amazing core of 7-8 players from university. We played together, all of us, for 4 years. We had that time, and that was my real joy and love in dodgeball. That was what got me stuck into dodgeball, is that we all had this same purpose and vision on the court. We all knew how we'd play together, and it was just that was probably the greatest feeling, that like I try and sort of reenact, or like that camaraderie, that teamwork, that you just rely on each other, and if you're having a bad day, someone else will step up. And then it happened that in the last year or two of university, they started with the national teams, and all of us were playing for different national teams, predominantly England. So I was in the England setup from the beginning, the early days. The other remnants are Josiah, Koenig, Alex Harrison. So I think these are the dinosaurs still clinging on to dodgeball. And I think we won the first 3 Euros I was a part of, and obviously England won back in those days. I think you've touched on that earlier in your podcast, that Scotland would give a good game, but it was mostly England's to lose. And then I had a bit of a hiatus when I moved away from England in like 2013, 2012. I moved to Germany, then Sweden, and I picked up dodgeball again for the Belfast Euros just before then, and went from perennial champions to perennial spectaculars. So that's
a big switch, but a good one.
Yeah, I think. It's a big switch. It was a big culture shock in a way, both from a sporting standpoint and just as a competitive mindset on the court and off the court as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember the spectaculars back from 2013. You haven't been there. So back then they were just spectacular. There were
Mm.
some ex-handball players and just people who liked to party and have a good time. And we really connected with that very early on, as we came from sort of the same background and the same spirit. We brought the same energy to the game, and we had a lot of really fun competitions on and off the court. And that's something where I think we have a pretty similar history. Sweden started a little bit earlier than us, but we sort of came from the same background with handball players and people who like to have a good time. And then we basically have the same trajectory, but at some point, sort of, we managed to get ahead of Sweden. And I think that's something that's interesting to me is where, like, we in Austria didn't have any English player, no players who really had any experience with the whole game. So we sort of invented it ourselves again. But then Sweden had you especially, and then Costa, who came from Austria and brought a little bit from us to Sweden. So how do you see like your impact on the national squad and dodgeball in general in Sweden?
I mean, I think I've actually pinpointed that point where our trajectories went in different directions. I think it's Lignano.
Yeah.
We actually played NI men's in the quarters, actually, I believe it is. And I think it went down to the last set. My memory is still a little bit hazy because that was a wild tournament, but I think that was the one where we were super happy. We came fifth overall, and then we've never really matched that since. We've always been a top 8 team. I mean, I took over as head of sport in 2019, which I think is actually the year after Lignano, which isn't a great trend. But as you sort of touched on earlier, my focus was to really improve our consistency, especially like the adoption of, I called it risk control, where you have sort of a sliding scale. The bigger the player difference in your favor, the more controlled you play, the greater it's in the other team's opposition's favor, the more risks you have to take to claw your way back in. And then the emphasis was always on, if you have that control style, that the aim is to be ready to punish the opposition's mistakes, rather than keep on playing the same passion. That same style, because like I saw already from the early days when we had our really talented handball players that were just there to have a fun trip with their friends. We were getting player leads in sets. We were getting set leads in matches, but just the consistency. We never actually made it hard for our opponents to win the matches. We'll get ourselves into the right positions, but then we'd just throw it away. And then the fact that every nation is getting better, every team, every player is getting better, so that the gaps between individual skill is just shrinking every year. And then all those teams that are fighting for that fourth spot in the Euro side, I think if I try and list the teams, it's like us, Scotland, Wales, France, Czech, Italy, Spain are definitely up there as well.
Yeah,
it's very feisty. And then also the 20-minute halves. I think that's had a big impact. We had a very good game against England men's in Drachten, where I think we ended up losing by 1 set in the group stages. I think if we'd played it out across an extra 10 minutes, it probably wouldn't have been as close. But yeah, I mean, the story then was just trying to have less of a reliance on individual brilliance and more of a reliance on teamwork and consistency. I don't know if you have any questions now, but there was a couple of struggles there in getting that message across based on how we set it up.
Yeah, for sure. Let's dive into that right now a little bit, because I think you came from the English background, basically, which was at that point the most structured and most professional way you could come at the sport. And you basically went to the complete opposite, to the spectaculars, where basically it was all about doing spectacular things, doing splits on court and not caring about the outcome as much. And how was it like combining those two worlds? And how was it for you to transition to that new world, bringing your background with it? And how was it possible, or how easy was it for them as well to take your point of view to the game? Where they're like open, because we know they're quite an open community, but are they as open to like the structure and like the tactics and everything you brought with you? Because basically your style of play is to reduce the spectacular to a minimum. And how
Exactly.
do they like that?
A strong contrast. I think the first year or two, I kind of just accepted it. I tried to make the difference that I could on the court. I remember trying to, I think Eric Engström, I love him, but he's a very talented player. But for him, I was trying to introduce, like, can we have a calling system? Like, who calls? It's like, now we just solve it by whoever shouts the loudest. There'll always be someone that steps up to take the calling.
That's
that
one
ended
way.
up being me, because like the very English attitude, we're not afraid, we're not shy, whereas the Swedes are a bit more reserved. But that obviously, and then I remember we had a discussion. Like I was really trying to push. I think it might have been a year or two before Lignano. I was like, I mean, we've got players, right? We can win. And I remember distinctly he said to me, like, if we wanted to win, I just invite like my proper handball connections and we could win the tournament. And I think that's actually, I think back then, they probably could have cruised to the final until they met England. Yeah. Like, I think genuinely, if you have people that are playing top division handball in Sweden even, or second division, with a 3-ball game, I think it would have been quite interesting to see how far that's going.
I think you would have to prepare them a little bit, because we started from a handball background and we were not A-tier handballs, but we were quite decent handball players. And still when we went onto that field and played against England or other nations as well, we just made so many line faults and dumb mistakes, because handball players are used to 1 ball, and 3 balls is not that much more. 5 balls, it's a whole different ball game. Yeah. But it's still something so weird to throw at people that I think it still needed probably a little bit of a transition period. But definitely the gap was much smaller. And if you could throw really, really hard back then, a big ball, then you definitely had your spot in the top 5 at least.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it was actually Henrik Karlsson came in a year or two before me, and he started adding more structure. He was very hungry on that. And started getting with the good ideas. I was holding talks at our, like we became a registered sport under the sporting umbrella. We got to use the main sporting facilities that are based in Stockholm, like an amazing facility. So we had lecture rooms and training grounds, and we try to get along those concepts. And we also were picking up more and more players that had more of an actual sporting background. Aside from because when we were transitioning out, there were some handball players that still stuck around, like Robin and Sebastian, who were still playing at such a high level, and they understood. And once they understood that everyone else was moving towards let's play more structured, they were on board, and they read the game perfectly well. They understand. They have that competitive nature inside of them. And then we had Pete, who used to play dodgeball in the US, who was just a big cannon lefty. So we had either me and him on the wings, or Gustav Lilling and Costa on the wings, who were so that was they were really hard, heavy counters. Me and Pete were controlled, but sort of threatening with the posts and prees. But the challenge that we had in Sweden was we had all the clubs started growing up in different areas. So when I took over as head of sport, we had a big club in Stockholm, a big club in Gothenburg, a medium-sized club in Uppsala. And between Stockholm and Gothenburg, it's 3 to 5 hours by train. Like, it's a big one. And the concentration of talent wasn't quite there. And then also the way associations work in Sweden, we actually built up, I think, a very democratic process for the selection. So I have a selection committee. I'm elected by the board for the position. If I was to leave, people could apply and they would select the most suitable applicant. And then when the sports chief comes in, they can decide, they can select players from the different clubs. The way that I've set up a process now is that we have main representatives from Stockholm and Gothenburg, and we were having one from each major club essentially. And then it was just trying to get everyone together, make sure all the players feel seen, and trying to select the best possible team from there. What we were still lacking though is because the way that it's happened at West Coast, East Coast, there just wasn't enough concentration of talent or concentration of players to have frequent leagues. Like we didn't have the luxury that you have in Austria or even Northern Ireland, where you have 12 players on one in one, like within 10 kilometers of each other, that were really able to keep sharpening each other. But I instigated the Swedish Championships, having frequent competitive match days where we try to get as many people as possible into one area. And we're trying to build up a sort of club league setup. I know Gothenburg have a smaller one set. I increased the number of national team training camps we have. And then I'm also trying to build up a proper coaching tree so that we have people that get more and more comfortable taking over. Luckily, Pierre started a certification course or a degree, which helped us standardize that. But I think, so we had the challenges with the geography. We're far apart now. We've got Lund, who are growing as a club, and they're about 7 hours from Stockholm, which is a challenge. COVID, you've mentioned this also in your previous podcast. I think there was an NEC planned just before the main lockdown started, and I think we had so many amazing players there, but they all disappeared after COVID was lifted. I think we had about 2 or 3 teams selected on the men's side that were all going to come, and I think afterwards we were barely scraping together sort of one reserve team.
Yeah.
So it was a very different story there. And I think when we're looking at the lack of sort of player talent concentration, there wasn't a really good way to have that feedback loop when you're playing at Euros. Every mistake gets punished. The wrong ways of playing get punished very quickly. Whereas if you're playing in my local club now that I set up in Linköping or even in Uppsala, I could get away with throwing a slightly sloppy catch or like a catchable ball, or you could play a bit riskier, but you wouldn't have that mechanism that's like, okay, no, I've actually got that immediate stick or the immediate carrot for playing right. I wasn't playing in a league and getting the euphoria of winning by playing correctly. Yeah, and I think that's where we've looked towards Austria as the model. Obviously, England have a far better setup, a great British dodgeball. So that's been the challenge now for us, and we're getting there. We have I don't know how to translate it into English, but we have like a West Coast League. So that's Alingsås, Gothenburg, Lund, Copenhagen, and a new club, Varberg. So that's 5 clubs that are trying to get frequent matches together in a geographic location. All of them have to travel around 2-3 hours, but they commit to that 2 weekends every sort of 5-6 months, I think.
Okay. Because it sounds actually really structured and in a few ways much better or more progressed than our system is. So we have it basically a little bit the other way around, where for us everything is concentrated really in one location, and in that location it works quite well. And that's probably one of the reasons for our national team success. As you said, we have all our good players in one place, and we have to travel half an hour at most throughout the city to meet each other and play against each other. But what we are lacking in Austria is like the cross-country development of dodgeball. So basically, since it's all based in Vienna, it's really tough to get clubs started somewhere else. And I think that's also a problem in small nations like Austria, where people are not prepared or willing to do any travel at all. So if it's 2 or 3 hours, not many people will take on that time. Where in other nations like the US, who is the complete opposite, where we
Yeah.
know people travel for 6 hours and fly to events and stuff. And Sweden is probably somewhere in between, closer to Austria than US, but still much bigger than Austria, where the distances are way bigger. But also, I think the willingness of people to travel a little bit might be more there than it is for us. So basically, 1 hour tops. And there are some clubs starting now who will travel to league days and stuff, but that is really a challenge for us. So I think that sounds very promising for the next 5 years, what you just described, that it starts to grow in different areas. And in Austria, it's really still dependent on a very few people and a few clubs. So it has its benefits for now, and for the time being, it gives us certain advantages, and we'll get into that. But also in the long term, it's really important to like get this movement and growing across the country. And you're gonna lose a little bit of quality, not a little bit, maybe a lot of quality, but you also have the benefits of getting lots of different opinions. And that something I want to dive in right now is like different opinions in dodgeball and different sort of strategies that evolve throughout time and play are something we always like to talk about after
Yes.
dodgeball games. So, and I've changed my opinion on that in recent years, because beginning I was completely conservative, because I have a very structured approach to that, not anything else in life, but that is very structured, where I just view the game like we always say chess or something. And I think you look at it the same way, where you have your risks and your rewards, and if you manage your mistakes, you're going to be really good. And because dodgeball has so many different situations, mistakes are the most important thing that you can take value out of. If you can avoid those or exploit those, you're going to be really far up there, especially in the beginning. And I really concentrated on that for a really long time now. And up to this point, I'd say I really focused all my training and all my tactics and strategy on that. And it's gotten us very far in that environment. But I think what the World Championships told us as well is that sometimes thinking outside the box can also have its benefits. And to get the balance between fire and ice, as we talked before, is, I think, the next step. And I think you have to get your ice really concrete and really the basis should be very conservative and really structured. But if you can get that down, then there is time for fire. Before that, it's gonna just melt the ice and everything's gonna go down. But I think that's sort of the next step. But it feels like from our conversations that you're still in that ice age, basically, and still have a lot of trouble with fire. So give me a little bit of insight into that. And I have to just congratulate myself on that analogy. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it works really well. I think, yeah, you mentioned in your previous podcast, the one with the big three, that you have sort of floor is your antithesis in dodgeball ideology. And I think Brett was trying to sort of align himself more towards floor, but you think he's in a different direction as well. I wanted to pick that apart a little bit more, but that's,
I think he's something else. He's not fire, he's not ice. I don't know what he is yet. Maybe he's iron or something.
Yeah, so he's something. But I feel sort of the same way, that sort of, especially me and Darko, we read the game very differently. Neither of us are wrong, but I think it's hard for us to really align on how we get there. It's taken us a long time to really be on the same page, and I'd say we're aware of it, and it's taking time. It's practice, it's talking, but we don't have those opportunities. We have maybe 2-3 camps a year, and then we're playing at Euros or Worlds, where every time you don't follow up, or every time you're not on the same page, you're going to get destroyed by an inexperienced team. But I think that's the commitment that me and Darko have made now, that we're going to try and get that 10-20% agreed on. I feel in some ways we're kind of merging together a bit more, into which I don't know how it's going to work out, how that blend is going to work. But I think we can start leading back into worlds now. But for yeah, I think so. That's going to just take time for me and Darker to be on the same page. I think we're also going to be talking a lot with Edvin, so see where he's at as a sort of an up and coming. Probably he's going to be carrying Dodgeball once Dark and I are gone. He's going to be for Dodgeball Sweden, sort of a very foundational piece. So we're just trying to really get on the same page, and that we commit one direction or another. Because I think we've gotten in trouble in the past where both of us are thrown, or that we've both waited for someone to do something, or we've followed up too late on each other's moves and we've lost sets, or we've lost games even with those mistakes. But then when I was at Worlds and I saw Australia, I think they're such a fun team, and I think if I had the benefit of looking back or hindsight when implementing sort of the risk control model, I might have done it differently. Because I think before, like when we're looking at us at Lignano or the previous last two tournaments, like the few tournaments where we're still consistently, place 5 team pretty much, we were a very strong counter-attacking team, very aggressive with big arms. That's what we were known for. Watch out, like Sweden's going to be supercharged. And I think Australia saw that on themselves, and instead of sort of looking at the European style of play, they really lent into, all right, how do we play around this? Like, we've got really lively, fast, athletic players that have big arms as well. How can we create a play style that's our own? And then if we want to take a European example, even, I think for me, I find Spain really impressive with how quickly they've improved. And I think they really tailored their gameplay around their strengths, which is sort of the pre and post throw game, playing with 2 balls, looking for playing around their catches, really utilizing that. So I just wondered, like, maybe we should have had more room, because for me, one thing I always wanted to punish was trying to get that fine line between when the player difference changes, that you instinctively need to switch from, oh, I've got a counter opportunity, to wait, the numbers have changed, I don't need to counter anymore. Yeah. And I think that uncertainty, unhesitation has meant that people generally favor slowing the game down a bit more again and playing what's essentially, your guys' games, Northern Ireland's games, but we're not all on the same page, and we're not as talented individual player wise for us to actually win a game playing the same style against you guys. Because we don't have the same cohesion that I think would let us win those scenarios. But I've started correcting that. I learned a lot from Worlds. It was up and down the Worlds.
Yeah, for sure. So dive a little bit, when we're at this topic right now, so dive a little bit into your Worlds experience, because I think it's still quite relevant and still quite interesting to hear from your personal point of view and also from the Swedish point of view. So you came into Worlds knowing that you're always fighting for that top 5 spot, and always been like at the door to the 3rd spot especially, and been fighting for that in the women's division lately and in the mixed division. So there was always like the thought about Sweden that you knew maybe next year, if they get a few things together, they're going to be a real threat and going to be knocking on that podium spot. But until now, they didn't deliver. And that's something that I think is quite interesting, because that happens to a lot of nations, where you think, we played them this Euros and we beat them, but still we see so much talent, so much growth. And I think also there is so much potential there. And you feel like maybe next year, if they get their shit together, they're going to be much more of a nuisance, and maybe they can beat us because they have so much stuff that we maybe are envious of, like Sweden with Edwin and stuff, you have so much power, so much aggression, so much handball background and throwing capacity. So we're like, why is it still not working out the way you would like it to be? And let's start with Worlds.
Yeah, I think you never really want to say it, but I think for the men's group, we felt, or at least I felt, very hard done by.
Yeah, definitely.
As a refresher, we had Scotland, Australia, Spain, Egypt, Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
And, I was worried for Australia. Like, I'd seen them at the Worlds in Edmonton.
Yeah.
I saw the troubles that they give you live in that first half. I was like, what is happening? We met them in the group stage in Worlds 2020 in Edmonton, and they took us apart. Like, they had Dent 99 then, who was also just rampaging up and down his right wing, just absolute crazy. And so I knew that was going to be a battle. Scotland, we'd seen them at NEC. We didn't face them in the men's, but Scotty was injured. Scotty Whitelaw was injured. Johnny Day is not playing in the setup anymore, and I felt a little bit more confident. And I'm going to qualify this statement. When I saw them playing in the men's at NEC, I thought we could take them.
Yeah.
I don't know what they did between NEC and Worlds, because the level they performed at Worlds was just, they jumped up another level on us. And that was no sport in men's. In mixed, we managed to beat them. It was very close. Relton had an absolute belter of a game. Really, really he pulled out some catches and was just unplayable. But on the men's side, they dismantled us. We weren't playing the right tactics. We couldn't get into their game. We couldn't bring our game into it. We were just, And Aldred, I think he took essentially a double catch, where he got a catch, Darko followed up with a suicide, and he caught Darko's suicide, and it's unreal. So Aldred had a really good, really strong game, but as well, for me, I see Scotland as very close rivals as us always, because while they might not always have as big flashy players, all of them play 100% correctly. Like, they're very much the British dodgeball model. They don't make mistakes. They don't throw away games. They play as you should.
Argue with that, but sure.
Okay, but I think they play very.
Have
there's one or
flashbacks
two.
to the game against Wales where they played in Osijek, and I've watched that game, Scotland versus Wales, and that was like one of the most entertaining games I've ever seen, and one of the most, I don't want to say it, but it was one of the stupidest games I've ever seen.
Yeah,
it was.
I found that it's because I think they are a bit loose with the fourth ball occasionally on their wings, but generally, for at least compared to us, they're looking for catches in the right situations.
Yeah, sure.
And they're just generally a bit more tactical, more aligned with my philosophy.
Yeah,
and
I would say that as well. I think that was an outlier, but it was still a really fun and entertaining game. And I think Wales won it back then, and then the groups were completely mixed up. But I didn't actually see Scotland at all this Worlds. I think our groups were always at some different spot in the area, and I didn't see anything of it. And I wanted to, because that was definitely the most interesting group out of all. And you didn't know from who would be first and who would be sixth in that group. So that was a complete struggle show, the whole group, but also very interesting. I feel that was the only really interesting group from an outsider's perspective. But of course, playing in that group costs you a lot of energy, and also you have no idea where you're going to finish.
Yeah. And I think that was Egypt. I think we played them first. Yeah, it was the first game we had against them. I think we had a 10-point lead going into the second half, or maybe even a 12-point lead. And then we rotated really heavily. They had a change up tactically at the half as well. And they just... We just didn't get back into the game. and they ended up winning by 1 set. And I think that sort of leads into sort of one of the main takeaways I had, is that we really need to review how we double. So if I'm going to be classist, like I think like a level 1 nation is the big three in Europe, you guys, Northern Ireland, England, and then if we're looking on a world perspective, probably USA. And then a level 2 team is pretty much the best of the rest, in that big pot bubbling away. And I think we as a level 2 team, especially when we end up with a difficult group, we don't have the luxury to be resting our best players. I think that was one of the things from Worlds, is that every game was a dogfight. I think as well on the mixed side, we had Scotland again, Northern Ireland, Argentina ended up being very tough for us. I think we ended up actually drawing against them, which was that's another thing we need to tackle into. But we found that, and then by the last day of the tournament, everything good?
Yeah, just my internet connection giving me some trouble.
Most of our players were injured. The last 2 matches, I essentially played the full 80 minutes. Darko played 1 match on basically a bum hamstring, like with 1 hamstring combined. And a lot of our women's were sort of out and injured. On the last match, it was me and 2 other guys that were actually physically capable to play.
Yeah.
And I think that was, we don't have the luxury anymore as a level 2 team to be able to spread resources across both men's and mixed, at least the way we've been doing. So I think we've come up with a solution. When does this podcast come out, by the way? How long does it take?
Probably in 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. Because I think we essentially me and my team, that we basically agreed on a way forward where we're going to dedicate players to one category, which we think is going to solve a lot of our problems. Just both from keeping players fresh and healthy, but also being able to dedicate time at training camps for each of the starting. I think I've done it in cores of 4, that they are able to work together and understand how they play, how they move, how they should fill in for each other if a player goes out, where they need to be, how they pump fake, just to be more on the same page and aligned. And then also to increase the team spirit, because I think that's actually something we've lost as a result of becoming more and more competitive in Sweden, that we essentially had a troop of 14 moving from men's to mixed to women's to men's. Like, you didn't have that same atmosphere in between the squads. There always felt like there was a select 14 moving around. And we weren't getting the results from it for it to be worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure.
And then if we're looking from a long-term perspective, it was sort of suffocating the ability for us to really develop the next generation of Dodgeball Sweden players. That you need to I think Italy and France, they've done a really good job with that. They saw it a lot earlier, that they need to start, being more conservative with their top players, but then also start pushing through newer players. Yes, you might start suffering. I know Italy men's, for a long time, they were always in the 4th, 5th spot as well with us. But they've started focusing and they're getting some really good talents through. France as well started pushing a lot more on the youth, and that's paying off, and just blooding their players on a European international level and just boosting their progression. So I think it's something that I've thought about for a long time after Worlds. I think from a personal player standpoint, I was very disappointed with how I played. Pretty much the first 5 days, when I was playing 80 minutes on the last day, I was good. Like body wise, I was fine, but I just wasn't playing well as a player. But I actually got motivated from it. I was like, yeah, I want to get back to where I know I can be, and I also want to have that with the team as well. I want us to get hungry again, and I want us to feel obliged to each other to bring our best on the court, to be accountable to each other. And for me, given how spread out we are, that we can only train together. I think now that we've backloaded our system, so hopefully we're going to be able to start from the first camp in January before Euros. So we're going to have 3 or 4 training camps. So 3 or 4 weekends where we can really train those pods to be a unit. And to have that team spirit and to be with each other and to be aligned with the coach and with the strategy and the style of play. And that we're not also polluting it a little bit with, mixed play style is different from men's. So that we get that. And it's the same, like we have women's that are struggling to play women's and mixed, because in mixed, you're more expendable. You're more willing to go for a trade. But if you are the top player that's been selected previously as a doubler, then in women's, your role is completely different. You need to be staying alive. You can't just be trading yourself for anybody. You need to be staying on court and making a difference when it matters. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think I think the foundations are going to be laid at Euros, building that, familiarity and just being on the same page tactically and strategically, and in all the scenarios that can happen in competitive dodgeball, that everyone has a comfortable knowledge what they need to do and what they should be doing and where the other players will be. I think it's going to be exciting to see how that keeps growing. And I think for me, that is the way forward with the way we are at now, where we have a lot of our top players in their 30s that have, a long injury history. So, and we've always been quite unfortunate with injuries before and during tournaments. But I think for us, that's kind of what I'm seeing as the way forward now, both to sort of secure success on an individual category basis, but also long term for bringing along the new crop of players.
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of points there, and I think that's basically a spot where lots of nations are in right now. And I think it's always a little bit different whether you're coming from the bottom or at the top at the moment, or in that in-between space where you face a few different maybe perspectives on the same problems. Like for us, it started at the bottom, and we at the beginning, we just tried it out and it was fun. And then we got into the more professional side and saw a little bit of success coming our way. So we wanted to improve on that and get even more successful. And then we sort of lost the fun part a little bit. I would say we never really did lose it, but I think also what you said, the team chemistry, it's a very fine line to walk where everyone who is at the tournament in the training camp really feels like he's actively involved in the whole thing. And that's something that is always very tough in the doubling players. That's a topic that can really erode sort of the team spirit or the whole feeling for the team. And that's something that is very important in dodgeball, that the players really know each other and play together. And if you don't have that cohesion, you lose a lot of qualities, even though you may play your best 6 players in that game. And for us, we moved from basically playing them double, playing them single, making separate teams. Then we, for a long time, had sort of a mix out of both, where we playing our best players and having the best 4 men and best 4 women maybe, and then some players to fill up the team and play more for the group stages. But as you said, that's a very weird vibe in a team when you know you're sort of that 8 to 14 spot and you're just there for the group, and the half of your team is also playing in a different tournament basically. So it's really tough to get that cohesive team spirit going. And so at the time we decided to really focus completely on doubling, and it worked out quite well the last few years for us. But it's also a struggle how you balance it and how you manage the time players get. And I think it's much easier at the moment for the top 3 nations, because we can rest a lot of our players in the group stages, especially if the groups are favorable. I think if we would have been in your shoes, it would have been much a whole different topic, I think, because you can't rest the players like the way we could. And so it's always a fine line between what you want now, how you want to maximize your chances of succeeding at the tournament or at in a certain game. But also the long-term aspects are really important at the moment, because dodgeball is growing and the communities are growing, and the growth is basically the only thing that keeps this thing going and keeps it sustainable. So it has to have some say in the whole matter, I think, at this point. And if you are successful, then many topics are much easier, because at least you won. So sort of your strategy paid off, and it's much easier to argue for that. And it also makes it easier for the team, because if you're winning, then even though there are some in not completely harmonic topics in the team, still you know that you're pulling for one common goal, and if you reach that, lots of other stuff solves itself. But if you struggle, then all those corrosions basically get amplified and can be really toxic. And I think that's a really smart decision on your part to really focus on that, because otherwise it won't happen, and it will get even more pressure to the coaches, the people who decide the stuff, and also to the players who end up playing in those situations, and it won't send a good signal to the rest of the recreational and national squad as well. So I think that's a smart point, and we are at that cross point where we are thinking about it, but for now we have a different solution because we have a different player pool, but it might change at the next Euro. So if your style works out, and Spain and Czech and all those teams that have the capabilities to basically produce those teams that can win against the top 3 nations, then I think we're going to have to think about it differently. And so you touched on a quite interesting topic as well, which I've talked a little bit with Ryan about, is like the injuries and managing your players through a whole tournament. And it's a topic we have to put a lot of emphasis on. And I talked to Brad and Adam about it as well. And we came to the conclusion, for us, it's the most important thing to get healthy and fit to a semifinal. But that's a whole different point of view from your team. So basically, how do you try to manage it, and how did you manage it in the past, and what are sort of your solutions for the next tournaments to get not so many injured players at the end?
Yeah, and I think you sort of already covered it there. I think you mentioned it even in the last podcast that, like, for us to even get through to the semi-final, it's not possible to rest the top 6. And if those top 6 are doubling, then you're going to run into issues that you're not even going to be able to perform at in the semis. And I think, the old adage is that, winning solves everything. I think in especially if you are that 8 to 14 spot, and you see the top 6 men lose anyway. It's like, why can I be playing? So I think, and one thing that I also want to push this year, which I think we might have had 1 or 2 years. I think the year of Trachten we had people being very very taking fitness seriously, but we don't really have it consistently where people aren't putting themselves in the shape. And I think part of that is an oversight from me, because I take it for granted as a player. Like, I always work to be able to train as hard as I can and be in the best shape possible. But I think it's becoming a criteria now that if you even want to be considered to be one of the ones that maybe doubles a little bit, outside of the cause, that you need to be ready to perhaps be playing 100% in mixed if two people go down injured. And I think now people are just being generally a bit smarter and a bit more cautious. They're not pushing through injuries as they have in the past. Whereas, like, you got to take the bigger picture. And I think Neely also covered that, where he was, dodgeball is just a hobby. It's a quite expensive hobby, but a beautiful hobby. But you don't want to. It's fine. I think you don't want to be Dirk Nowitzki that can't walk in his 50s anymore.
Yeah, we're not rich enough for that.
Yeah, exactly. We don't. Yeah, you don't get paid. And I think some people have that mindset where they just really want to grind it. We have some issues with some players that really, they really put everything on the line for dodgeball. But then, it's more important that, you talk about the physical and the health standard first, that, you want the decent quality, both to be in the best shape you can be, but then also you sometimes have to make decisions in the player's best interests beyond what they want in that moment, in that tournament, what they want to do, their own ambitions. But I think that's kind of the way that we've solved it now is by going down to the course and trying to build up that you're playing for your teammates, that you want to be in shape for your teammates. You know that you're going to be playing together with them a lot throughout the tournament. You know that you want to be able to perform. You don't want to let them down. And then if you're on the outside looking in a little bit from outside the course, that there's still going to be lots of playing opportunities available, and you need to be ready to step up. So I think that's where we are. And so part of our selection committee, the way the work is, we call it the aspirant, so the people aspiring to be in what we've called the Bruto pool. The Bruto pool is everyone from which we can select that could potentially go to a tournament. And now we're going to have that decision before the first camp of January. We're going to decide the Netto pool and the calls. So the Netto pool is a short list of 16 to 24 players that are potential eligible to play. And then everyone who's in the Bruto, they're going to be made aware of that. They're going to be given the feedback points on what they need to be improving on to get up to that next level. And this is where we have a slightly tricky thing, because in Sweden, we've developed it there so that the coaches, they select the final squad from that 16 to 24 pot. And it makes sense because they have the ideas, their lineups, they're going to be talking about the playing time, they have a better idea, and they're actually responsible for the results during the tournament. Previously, we just given them, here's your 12 players, good luck. And they haven't been given the right tools that they think they want, that they need to achieve the targets we gave them. But then that also puts the onus on the coach to be talking to the people in the Netto pool that didn't make the Netto squad. Like, okay, what do you need to improve on to be considered next year? Or like, sorry. And I think that's one thing that I really want to make sure we have extra focus and emphasis on these next few years, is that dialogue between the selection committee and the Bruto players and the Netto players, and then also the coaches to the Netto players, how we're going to keep progressing the individual players. What does it take for number 9 in the lineup to become a starting 6 player? What is it that the coach sees as missing? Because I feel in some ways people have stagnated a little, or we they're unsure of how to keep going, how to keep developing, at least in the eyes of the coach, in order for them to be actually starting. And I kind of want to bring back to Osijek now, because we had you in the quarterfinals in the men's.
Yeah.
And I thought that I was sidelined. I was out for that tournament. But I found it really interesting because, to be honest, Edvin got the better of you that game.
Definitely.
And I think you've also admitted that at Osijek, the team wasn't where you wanted them to be. We saw that in final. The men's team, you lost quite.
Yeah, I think in Osijek it was much better than it was in Drachten. In Drachten it was not there at all. I think in Osijek it was much better, and I think the quarter and semifinals against you and against France showed that we were sort of on our way there. So especially in the quarterfinals against you guys, I remember that game against Edwin where I was like, as soon as I released, he just came 100% at me, and I was like, okay, I have not a lot to say about this, and I wasn't completely in that game mentally, because I was like, okay, it's a quarterfinal. I'm just gonna reserve a little bit of energy, and it didn't work out at all. So he just hit me up and down the court, and in the end, I was quite grateful because I didn't play a lot of time in that quarterfinal. But that was also the first time that the team really showed up for us, and where they made you pay afterwards for me. And players like Flo, Hackel, or Xaver and Model and stuff really got to show how good they really are. And yeah, I think just give your side of the story, because maybe you wanted to go somewhere else.
No, I mean, I think for me, and that's, I'm challenging. I know Dodgeball Sweden is going to be listening, but I think as a level 2 team, sometimes the mentality can be that, we're just happy to be playing in the same match against you guys. We see it as a more of, this is a learning experience. Yeah, we see it as more of a learning experience rather than, and we don't necessarily, aside from Edvin, we didn't really play with the confidence that, we can actually take it to this team. And I think it was very frustrating to watch, being, impotent, unable to have any influence. I think that was one of the toughest things, actually, not being able to play and just watching the teams. But I think that you have that confidence in those matches to be able to say, no, okay, Edvin's gotten us a really good gap now. But for me, it felt like we didn't take it seriously. We went into that match not expecting to win.
Yeah.
And then in the match, we didn't take our chances, or we took it for granted. Oh, we're ahead now, but we're not going to close out this game properly. We're not going to close the door and secure this set point. Because I feel like there were a lot of sets in that match where it was just, we were winning so handily, but then everyone just had brain farts, or just decide, okay, no, I'm going to try this here, or I'm going to, miss floor from half a meter away. Like, it was very frustrating. And I think that's something that I also want to really emphasize for us going forward, is that, like, we're going to dedicate so much to those individual categories and those teammates that we're not going to take it for granted just being in a match review. That's not good enough. That we really want to say, okay, we're gonna win. Like, we know we can win if we play according to our style and strategy, and we're going to play the right way, and we're not going to just say, oh, this is Austria, we've lost. We're going to be looking at we want to get to that 4th spot. We want to get through to that 3rd spot. And I think that's what I'm hungry for now. That's for me. I see the progression in, like, I want us to play consistently. We might not always get the results we want, but I want us to play across the same ideology by each category, and that if there are mistakes, people are aware of it, and they know what to fix in the next set or the next match. And I think that's why, for me, I think like in Euros, I really want that. That's the focus now, that we really see. Okay, we're going to play with this ideology. We know how we're going to execute it, and we're going to practice on executing it, and we're going to take every team that we can, and then keep fine tuning and keep developing and keep getting better. Because I think we have actually got a lot of really good players in that 7 to 11, even 12 spot that are perfectly capable. And I think I'd like to look at like the NBA, where you mentioned that most people shouldn't be playing the full 40 minutes, or they don't usually play the full 40 minutes. You can't play at the same intensity. And then you look in the NBA, which is a very star power oriented like sports, but even the star players, they're playing 40 out of 48 minutes, or like 38 out of 48 minutes. Like I think, and that's the way forward. Like you can't be playing to a full 40-minute match to the best of your capabilities, and that's why you need to have everyone ready and capable and understand what they need to do, but also the confidence that they can do it against you. And I think that's like for Edvin, I've always highlighted to him, like, I want you to be like Stefan Leitinger. Like, you've got the bigger arm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Edvin's got a bigger
arm. For sure.
But that he needs to understand that, like, that your decision making when you're controlling the game, you realize that if you have the ball in your hand, you're a much bigger threat. Your job is to create movement, to get attention, to let your other teammates get hits. If your teammates aren't getting hits, you realize, okay, I need to amp up my threat level. I need to release now. And then you trust that your teammates are going to cover you, or at least punish when they punish you. And I think we call it the Viking mode, where his pupils dilate. Like there's nothing left. And in some games, he's unplayable when he does that. And then you can really play around that. We've got Darker, who can really take over a game when you piss him off enough. So it's finding the right trait. And then Emil as well, he's a ridiculously tricky player, number 22 for us, Tellstrom.
Yeah.
Like, some of the catches he does is insane. The angles that he's got on his left arm throw is really good. So those are like our peak players, but we've also got really talented players. The next wave are getting there. And I think they need to have the confidence, understanding that they can play to that level and they can keep developing, but also tactically that they are making the right decisions in every situation. Because I think in a couple of years' time, the difference between the top players is almost going to be even.
Yeah.
Like in terms of ability, what's going to differentiate them is the actual decision making and how they dictate the game from their corner. And like you see that now, like when Austria goes against Northern Ireland, that you and Adam Hill are going at it, and then there's the action happening all around you guys, but it's just a battle between you two and who can have the biggest influence.
Yeah.
But I think the gap is going to keep closing between, the Hills, the Leitingers, the Koenigs. Like we saw and I think McElroy highlighted as well, that Kareem, number 42 for Northern Ireland, he took the game to Brett.
Yeah.
And like that wasn't really possible 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, especially like I said before, with Edwin or now with Kareem taking the game to players like Brad or me, it's now possible to, or in the past, like a few years ago, it was possible for me to play like 70% very conservative and just take a step back, and like my aura and presence and my capabilities just let me through the game. And now the level is much, much deeper, and every player at that level to the 10th spot can throw really hard, can catch, can move. So your abilities don't set you apart that far. And there are some people and some players who still have that special spark, like Brad can develop stuff out of thin air that no one else can even think about. And there are players who just have that aggression and that power and presence on the court that they can still do a few things outside that usual spectrum. And Darko and Edwin are definitely some of those players. But you need a team now. And
Yeah.
And you need a team and also a sort of balance throughout the whole game, because you can do those things for 1 or 2 sets maybe, and sometimes you need to pull those out and you need those players in the tough matches in the final minutes to show up. But the consistency throughout a tournament, throughout one game, is just much more relevant right now, especially in the men's and women's division, where like the talent is so evenly spread, and it doesn't make that much of a difference if you hit someone out anymore. In the
Mm.
past, it was like if you hit one player out, then the whole quality of the team drops dramatically, or like a Giselle in Italy, or like me in
Mm.
Austria, or a Brett, or stuff like that. If you took the head of the snake, then the rest was pretty much up for grabs. And that's going to change dramatically. And as you said, the most important thing, and that's what I realized is really the most important thing that sets me apart, and probably in the future it won't, is the decision making in the situation. And you need
Mm.
certain capabilities and strengths outside that, and your basics have to be quite strong. But then you need those decisions and those fast reactions and those influences on the game that you don't even see, that happen in between throws and in between
Mm.
actions. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see what dodgeball is really, what sport dodgeball really is, because there is still so much improvement on the individual basis that I don't think we have even touched to where the sport is going to be at the top level in a few years. Like, there is still so much influence of individual skills and players that sometimes it's not needed to be as structured as a team, to be as efficient, to be as
Mm.
clinical in certain situations. But I think that's going to be much more important from now on out. And I think it showed this worlds for the first time that you can really, the teams who got that better under control and really got to control one individual player on the other team. And you mentioned it with Scotland, where I think in the past it was those certain players, but Scotland is a mass, and even though you don't know every one of their players, they're all up to such a high standard
Mm.
that you think you finally got out Relton, but there are still 5 other players that are on the same level, just you didn't expect it from them maybe. And so I think the cohesiveness and the teamwork together and the strategy and all the stuff that is kind of boring in training. And I think that's why people on the recreational level don't want to do it, because all the flashy stuff and throwing and catching, that is the fun part about dodgeball. And it's the part why we started it basically. But it's not going to get you to the same place anymore.
Mm.
And I think there's going to be lots of tedious work to do with the teams and stuff that where it separates the player who just want to do it for fun and the players who really want to be in it to win it. And I think that's where it's going to go in the next few years. And that's maybe also something that's just something that popped into my mind, why foam has a certain appeal to players right now, because I think foam is a little bit different in that aspect, where you can have that
Mm.
like certain special athleticism. If you have those special throws up your sleeve, then you can have much more fun and impact as an individual player, and you're not relying as much on your team. And in cloth you can't do that, because your possibilities are just a little bit captured, and there are some certain things you can do, but in the end it's a team sport. And I personally love that, but it's also, it can be a bit more boring. But if you understand what every contribution of every player is, and every player knows what his role is and what she or he has to do to get that goal together, and if the objective of the team goal gets much more into the focus, instead of I want to throw brief rows, then I think it's going to be a whole different outlook. And I personally think that's really fun and interesting. And on a social level as well, it might be much more, much nicer in the end. But I think it's going to be less highlight reels from one player in the future. And if there is a highlight reel, then probably someone on the other side fucked up and you did something absolutely spectacular. So I
Yeah.
think there is still a lot of wiggle room. And if you are ready to work really hard and broaden your boundaries, then everything is still possible. But the tedious and icy stuff of the whole game really needs to be just a foundation and basic, and it shouldn't be something that you think about. It should be something that everyone has, and then we can talk about fire, basically. Don't know
I
if that
I,
makes sense.
I love that. So I really want to dig into like just bring out those 3 points, like that individual effort, like understanding when you go and when you don't. You use your, as you call it, aura, I think, in a good way, like that threat being there. I think Brett touched upon it as well. Like, I think, that pre throw, even if it doesn't hit, psychologically, it's still playing in their minds. Okay, it could release, it's going to make them less certain. Because I think sometimes some top players, they fall into the trap like, oh, I've just succeeded in this, I'm going to try it at the same time, and that's not going to happen again in the next set, or to finish out the set, it's not going to be there. So I think that individual awareness of when enough is enough. But I think that's also us coming from the ice side, maybe, whereas the fire side is like, you're on a roll, you've got the momentum, just finish. And I really like that point you mentioned, that with like why foam is getting that appealing, because that's when you start separating the people that play dodgeball as a team, that really want to make sure like it's about us being as a unit and understanding each other, versus me doing these sick plays. And I think for me, that's what I've always gravitated to in dodgeball, is that unit and that understanding, like, okay, this is what I need to do, this is how I need to play for the interests of my team. And then lastly, you also touched upon, like, we haven't even seen like the best individual type. So I want to bounce a question back to you. Like, what do you think the ultimate body, like player body type, is going to play out to be?
I think probably something like Edwin, or like Adam in a little bit smaller. So I think
Yeah.
like length is quite important in dodgeball, because the longer your levers are, the more force and velocity you can produce. And also it's good to be not too big and heavy. So you have to be fast, you have to be very agile, but create a lot of force. And so I think a long, thin, athletic body is probably really good for some different players who like to be more of a catcher or stuff like that. Maybe also small and wider frames are good as well. So, but I don't think dodgeball is for the really, really tall players like Johnny, or we have a few of them as well. I think it's a little bit tougher. It gives you some opportunities because you can throw really, really hard, but you're just so big of a target that you have to be really athletic to get all your limbs out of the way. And I think if you're a little bit smaller and more stocky, you have just like a Smurf, or like a Ryan Neely, or people like that, or maybe like me, who could potentially be quite good at catching and getting their body in the right position for stuff like that, if they can do that. So I think there's probably going to be a lot of variety, and depending on which style you prefer, there are going to be the small, really fast players who are like Basti, and there are going to be the little bit heavier players who have a lot of power to go through people, like a Gisele. And so I think there are a lot of player types, and I think it depends a little bit on the position you are in. But I think too big of a frame, at least until we don't change the court, and I don't think we're gonna do it anytime soon, because the volleyball court is quite good. But especially if you're 6 player and you're really tall, you take up a lot of space, and that's something that will be exploited, and you have to be really good in other parts of the game to, I think, make up for that. So I don't know. I think like the foam playing body is even more specific, where you see lots of those Asian people who are really thin and small, but extremely athletic and fast. I think for the foam, it's even more specific, probably, because you don't need that much raw power to accelerate that ball. But for cloth, I think it's going to be a little bit leaning towards heavier, stronger people. But still, speed is also so important, because you can make up a lot of distance with the velocity of your feet, basically. But I think if I choose a body, I would go somewhere. I don't know how tall Edwin is, but maybe
He's
a mixture
195.
between Yeah, maybe I would say like a mixture between Adam and me, probably
Mm.
somewhere where Brad is at, but a little
Yeah,
bit faster. So, or
yeah, he's
younger,
so
just maybe just younger.
yeah. No, I think I like when I'm pitching dodgeball, I'm describing dodgeball to other people. I think right now, and I think there will always be places more so than in perhaps other sports for different body sizes and shapes and
Yeah,
types. And I think that's you can really carve out a niche for yourself. But then if you were to create the perfect body type in a lab, then I think I agree. Sort of like that 185, maybe 190 ish. That sort of more wiry build that can generate power is probably where
and
you
also
want to end up.
sustain it for a long time because I think the heavier
Yeah,
players and the big muscle players also really um, lose a lot of pace throughout the game. It's like in boxing. If you have the mass,
yeah.
you're not going to hold up for 5 rounds. So I think in between, so cardio and stamina is also something that is very important. So both of those things like
Mm.
velocity and also stamina are quite important.
Yeah, and when you're scouting players, you try to see who might have it when you're trying to pick the next generation. Like who do I focus on to try and sell dodgeball more to? But I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're on to something.
Yeah, but I
Yeah,
think with children, it's really interesting to see, at least from my experience, the players we have in our club who are like 15, 16 years old now, or even 13. I played yesterday in our club, and like in our training session, there are always now like 10 to 15 grown-ups and 10 to 20, I say children, but they're 15, around 15 now, and they've been playing dodgeball for a few weeks, a few years now. And I see that the fast and small children have a big advantage because if
mm.
their timing is right, they have so much flexibility and speed that it's almost impossible to hit them. So I hope Joey is listening to this podcast. I'm gonna call him out, Joey Solo. He's gonna be, hopefully in the next few years, he's gonna take up my spot in the national team, and he's giving me a lot of trouble now in training and keeping me on my toes. And he's turning 16, I think. But I think like those smaller and really fast players, if they get their head around it, they're gonna have a really good time in dodgeball against the big big arms and tall people
Mm.
like Tamash or Steve or stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, like that being able to beat that block on a like that player on a running counter. Like the smaller they are, the easier it is. Like there's less just surface area to hit. So I think that's really so. If you're super fast and just not a big target, you can just get up in people's faces really quickly
Yeah. Like the
and get out of
Australian
that
guys.
force
They're
quickly.
not that tall, but they're really, really fast.
But then there's been another topic that keeps on coming up. Your favorite bugbear, the headshots.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So your main one is around the 2 meter rule.
And yeah, I would say my main point is basically that it's really hard to protect players without making it very hard to call as a ref, and also without interrupting the game basically.
Mm.
And I think it's really tough to make that decision and putting the burden of protecting the player on a person that tries to hit someone out with everything they have. And I think personally it's part of the sport, at least at the top level. And I also think that there is no scientific or any proof that it is actually harmful. So
Mm.
what I want to say, I want to caveat that because obviously it's not good getting hit too hard in the head, and I think the recent past has shown in other sports like football or even soccer where we don't let children do headers anymore and stuff like that. So that brain health is a really important topic, and getting hit in the head is not great. But I think in our sport with our balls, we don't have basically the evidence that it does any harm, and it's not going to come probably anytime soon. And it's a big part of the game. So if you just say it's probably not good for you and we're going to get it out of the sport, then I think we're going to kill dodgeball at the level it's at right now. I think there is a place in recreational sport, in youth sport, where like winning and the aim of bringing the sport to the highest level isn't as important, and safety is much more important. But I think at the top level, at least, the aim is to win. The aim is to get everything out of the sport, and headshots are a big part of that. And I think it's like with boxing or MMA, where if you play dodgeball, then it's a risk you actively take. And if you don't want that, which I totally get, then probably dodgeball isn't the sport for you. But I don't think that sport should completely change in order to protect players from that. And if a player doesn't want to get hit by a big guy from 2 meters, then he or she probably is in the wrong sport, I think.
I mean, for me, I agree in principle. Like, I don't mind getting headshots, especially like from the back line. And it generally, if I get called out, I'm not looking to make a flashy play. I generally sort of just cover my head and let them hit me. I've gotten enough face damage, so it's just not worth it. But so for me, I'm also generally like, when people open themselves up to try and take a catch, I feel like that almost sort of waives their rights. Like, if you're generally like, you set your body and you say you're looking for the catch, your whole body is facing towards the releaser. You've decided, okay, I'm going to take my odds at 2 meters to catch the ball. That it almost voids the 2 meter rule, because you've committed and you've made the business choice, to put it in NFL terms, that like, okay, I'm going to go for the catch. I might end up with a concussion or whatsoever. But I think the issue is, like, where I find it becomes a little bit more gray is mixed. And I really love mixed in dodgeball. I think that's one of the things that makes it such a special, unique sport. But optically, women getting headshot by men is not good for the sport. And I think,
I see that. I just want to push a little bit back on that, because I get the point, but I think certainly there are a lot of women who don't want to get a headshot from someone who can throw over 100 kilometers per hour, and I completely understand that. So I think mixed is a really specific game that isn't made for everyone. And I understand if you are a woman and you don't want to play mixed, at least at that level. But I think to protect women more in that sport is also a weird optic, in my opinion. So because I don't know if it's tougher on women if they get a headshot than on men. I don't know it. I think it's probably very dependent on the person. And at least my experience in Austria is that women take headshots often much better than men. And our women are probably a little bit different to, I talked to Christopher, than some women in Sweden, where they are used to training with us all the time, and they are going for a lot of catches. And if you go for a lot of catches, you often get a headshot. That's just something. If you are a dodger, you're not getting those kind of headshots that you usually receive if you go for catches. So they are in a different position sometimes, but it's still something that you are deciding for yourself, and you're freely willing to do it. And I think headshots from 7 meters are probably as devastating as from 3 meters. I don't know if there is much of a difference. And I think they're sometimes much harder to avoid, because if it comes from 3 meters, you're probably seeing it. And that is also my one caveat, where I called it like malicious intent. I don't know if it's that, but I think if a player isn't looking at you and you're in a certain range, whether it's 2 meters or 5 meters or what else, if you blindside them in the head and you have a lot of different options to hit them out, then that's on you. And that's where I would draw the line, because that is never good. To getting blindsided in the head is just way worse than knowing it comes at you and you can brace yourself for it. But otherwise, I think you have to make that decision for yourself. And if you want to protect your head, you have to protect it sometimes with your hands, and you can move your head really fast. So it doesn't really happen if you are athletic enough and prepared for it as well. Where it's harder for women is because they make the transition from the women's sport to the mixed sport, where there's just a velocity difference. And so if you aren't used to that, that's probably a big issue. And that is something that we might have to consider in how we choose players for the women's game and for the mixed game, and how players themselves choose where they want to play. And I don't know, maybe on the recreational level and in the beginning, it's good. And I tell that to my players in training as well. If they're youth players, no one should throw at their head. It still happens, and sometimes it hurts, but at least to me personally, nothing happened that was dramatic or had some long-term consequences, at least that I know of. And so I think it's part of the risk in that game. And it is a risk and it's painful, but if you're mountain biking and you hit a tree, it doesn't ask you where you want to be hit. And in dodgeball, it's, for me, that's sort of just something you subscribe to or not. And I've talked about it a lot, and I think it's really tough to make, or I think it's impossible to make a rule protecting people without changing the game, at least on the top level. Because if someone just commits to a catch and he's kneeling in front of you, there is not a lot of room you can throw at him without risking hitting his head where he's not going to catch it. And if Murphy is kneeling before you and you're not going to hit his head, then there is about 2 centimeters off the floor where you can maybe hit him. And that's not part of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah. I just find like if there is a lot of maybe like targeting or high throws by men onto women's in the mixed match, for example, I think that can, and I think it does reflect quite poorly. I mean, I understand it, like especially like men's, if you want to headshot other men's, like in the men's category where it's kind of more fair game, you've probably got more firepower to return it. You're less likely to be intimidated or keep your head down for the rest of the match. And I think like from the little wormhole that I got stuck into was like I was looking into concussion rates between women and men.
Yeah.
And most of the recent studies say that women are twice as likely to get a concussion just across all sports, and that the effects are more longer term for them. And and there was lots of different hypotheses as to why it was. I think the main one was neck muscle. Or something like that, thickness of the neck, and also to do with the hormone levels, depending on where they are in the cycle, apparently. I agree. I don't know if there is an actual solution. I can't think of a rule either, but I think sometimes it can leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth if it can feel a little bit malicious or vindictive when there are a lot of high shots from very accurate players.
I get that, and I think that's a really important point, as you said. So the risk of concussions and injuries like that is a real risk, and it's a very important risk. And I think you have to talk to your players and really inform them about those risks, that they can make decisions based on specific information. And also, for me personally, I think it happens often if players come from different backgrounds. So basically, if you play in Sweden and no one in Sweden throws at your head, and you play mixed, and I'm just making something up here, and if you're a good catcher, then maybe you are really inclined to just stand your ground and catch. And then suddenly you play against good teams who, if you just stay there and catch, know that they can throw at you that way. And then the head becomes a very important point, not for hitting players. That's my personal opinion now. So I don't throw at people's heads to batter their heads in, except for Basti or Flo in training or something, that it's sometimes fun. But it's important, if people know that their head is in danger, then they are their movement becomes much different. If they're really feeling safe in their environment, then the confidence, as you said, is a really big part. So sometimes just throwing high is important to get your opponent to move differently and maybe duck down low, because there have been lots of teams who just been jumping in the back for lots of years and have been really successful with that, because everyone throws at toes. And then we changed that, and it made a really big difference, especially in the women. So we made a really big difference in the women game where we throw a lot high, because women don't do that. And I have to talk to them in training a lot of time, because they run at you and they always throw at your toes. And it's an instinct, and it's really tough to get it out of players. And there are certain reasons for that, but if you leave high out of the equation, you become a much weaker dodgeball player. And it's sort of a sign of respect. I don't throw at people's heads, and especially not at women's heads, if I don't think they are a threat to me. If they are no threat to me, I just try to get them out as safely as possible. But if they are a threat, and if they have caught me twice, then I'm going to start aiming for heads as well. And it's never a sign of malicious intent. It's always sort of a sign of respect. If I respect you, you're going to get a headshot, basically, or I'm going to try it at least. But I get that it's not a great thing. Getting hit in the head, again, is not something that is desirable. And I don't think it's great to try hitting people in the head for any sort of malicious intent. But I think it's a really important part of the body in our sport, as it is. I compare it always to boxing. I don't think the comparison is really good, but it's still, if you have an area that works really well to improve your chances of winning, then leaving that out just gives you so big disadvantages and changes the game completely that we have to overthink the whole thing. And as long as we want to play it the way we do, then I think we can change it completely. But still, I think protecting players is important, and I think informing players about protecting themselves in certain situations over getting that catch is also important as like a team spirit, that you're not, if Adam runs at me and he's 2 meters away from me, I'm going to fall on my back and catch him, obviously. But the other thing I do is turn around and protect my head, because I know he's going full throttle and he wants to kill me. So I'm going to protect myself, even though it reduces my chances, but I still live for the next set. So you have to make those decisions yourself as well, and you have to be sort of holding yourself to that responsibility as well, to a certain extent. Saying that, I also think it's important to protect players, and especially at the recreational level, and especially with new players. And I always tell, if some new players or some new female players come to our training, I always punish people. I say, if you give them a headshot, you do 50 push-ups. And that's just for protecting people to get into the sport. And at a certain point in training, it doesn't get you anything to hit someone out in the head, except if it's Basti, because then you hit him out. Or flow.
Yeah, but I think, like for me, I'll probably stick back to like one of the things for me that makes dodgeball so unique is the fact that it's a mixed sport. And where like some of these analogies where it's like you going on Adam or Adam going on you, where you're on the same playing ground.
I've gotten a lot of headshots from our women now, because I've always taught them to do high shots, and they make it a point to hit me in the head. It's not much better. Getting hit by Lisa or someone like that, I honestly don't feel the difference. But
maybe it's like
is.
I'm trying to look too far down the road, where like when you have people that are consistently throwing like 130 or something, but then on the men's side, or like where there is a more significant difference in throwing speeds between the two.
But then I think there is, as you said, neck strength is a really important part. And I think at that level, if we are at that level, then training for dodgeball is also really important. And if you're a woman who wants to play mixed, then it's probably really a good idea to protect your neck, basically. But I don't want to sound like I blame someone for getting a headshot, and I don't want to come off. But I feel like I've been stuck in that position for now. And I also believe that it's the right thing for now, until someone convinces me of a better alternative, or if the data shows that it's really destructive to players and we have to overthink the whole thing. But I get what you're saying, and I think it's an absolutely valid point. And I think it's important, like Christopher is doing his survey with women, and I think it would be good for all the nations to do and complete and fill out his survey, because I think it's an important topic. And if a lot of women in the mixed game feel that way and it impacts the game, then we have to think about that stuff and take it into consideration. Obviously, I'm coming from my perspective, so that's a very biased opinion. And I think in Austria, the opinion tends to lean in that direction, but also because I have a lot of say and authority. So I think our women player are used to that mentality as well. So that probably does a lot of bias, gives them a lot of bias as well. So it's definitely interesting to hear these different opinions. And I'm all for better solutions and protecting players.
And I think as a slight segue, so I sort of mentioned that I thought like one of the things that makes dodgeball so special is the mixed, and there isn't really a precedent in other, competitive sports where it's men's and women's going against each other at the same time. But I heard that you really like the no blocking. You think it's exciting. You want to try it out. But I despise no blocking, and for me, like one of the reasons I despise it is like there's like no precedent for it in any other sport where you have one of the core components of the game suddenly doesn't become available to you at a certain window. And I realized there is a slight like irony in there, like, oh, I love, mixed because it's so rare, but then I hate no blocking because you can't just suddenly say 1/4 of what like it means to be a dodgeballer isn't allowed for you in this special phase of the game. Like,
Yeah.
I just find it frustrating. Like, if you're a good dodgeballer, like you work on your throwing, your catching, your dodging, and your blocking. And then just to suddenly say, okay, now when the set clock runs out or the match clock runs out in half, you're not allowed to block anymore. I find just really weird from a sort of muscle memory and reflex standpoint, where like suddenly you have to go from blocking to catching. It doesn't appeal to me whatsoever.
Definitely, I understand it completely. And as a player, it doesn't really appeal to me as well. But the thing is, that is more coming from a spectator's perspective, I think. And that's where the discussion came from, where it's like watching people block isn't as entertaining. And if you are really good at blocking and you are up a few players, then it's really tough to get you out in cloth. And that is basically something where I thought maybe the no blocking rule can sort of make it a little bit more exciting or change those individual things where it could be potentially more exciting for people to watch it in the end. And sorry, I was gone for a second. Did you get that?
Half of it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you mentioned from the spectator side point that sometimes blocking in cloth can become very
exactly. So in the end, if you're one or two players left and the opponent players just give you 3 balls and have 2 balls to block, it's really tough to turn sets around, and it's often just players blocking away balls, and that is not so entertaining. And if it happens for 1 or 2 minutes, it can be a little bit tedious to watch. So I think there is maybe a possibility in no blocking. I've tried it out once and it was quite fun, but let's get into that later maybe. But I think it's maybe an option just to look at it and see what it does to the game, and if it like protects you from that boring part in the end, and maybe it makes it more watchable. I think from a player's perspective, I love blocking, so I don't want to cut my own flesh here and say let's get rid of blocking. I would be the first one to suffer from that, but it gives the whole thing a new component, a new facet, and I think it might be something that could be interesting and could make the sport even more interesting to spectators and more exciting to watch. But I don't know if it's the solution. I've tried it out once. It was quite interesting, but not a lot of takeaways from that, because I think you really have to, as you said, get rid of the muscle memory and get new tactics in, and it opens up a new possibility. Yeah. I think it's something that could be applied very, very sparsely in certain situations, like draws, which don't happen that often, but could spice it up a little bit. I wouldn't integrate it in the game like in foam. I think in foam it's a really important part. I think in cloth it might play a tiny little role, but not like that you have to finish each set. I don't think that's the same objective where you have to hit everyone out. I know in foam that's different, and it's a different I think perspective. But yeah, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I know we're gonna do this again. I think it's very informative, and see you soon, man. Talk to you soon.
Take care, Stefan. Bye.